Great.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and start. Welcome, everyone. My name is Catherine Grady. I am the Dean of the Brandeis International Business School and the Fred and Rita Richmond Distinguished Professor in Economics. Thank you for joining us today. This program is co-sponsored by our Israel Initiative and the Asper Center for Global Entrepreneurship here at Brandeis International Business School. We are grateful to our donors, including Alan Hassenfeld, Gary and Robin Jacobs, Udi Makati, and Ruben Ospitz for their continued support of our Israel Initiative and its related programming, as well as to Len Asper. Brandeis University has a very special relationship with Israel. From its founding in 1948, Brandeis's values have been rooted in Jewish history and experience, including a reverence for learning. Brandeis pursues rigorous academic work of the highest standard. At Brandeis, students and faculty are encouraged to question openly and accept nothing without study, debate, and reflection. This philosophy creates a breeding ground for innovation. At the International Business School, that same academic rigor is reflected in our academic programs and in our commitment to innovation, entrepreneurship, and cutting-edge fields like business analytics and fintech. We're proud that our students graduate with the knowledge and skills they need to succeed in today's data-driven economy. The Hassenfeld Immersion Program, one of our most popular initiatives, is a key part of the International Business School's Israel Initiative, which strives to strengthen connections between the Massachusetts-Israel innovation ecosystem and drive academic, corporate, and societal collaboration. We look forward to resuming this program in May of 2022. It will be our first big trip abroad, in which we'll take a select group of our master's students to Israel for a hands-on, intensive introduction to the country's business and economy. Through the Israel Initiative, we were able to sponsor the Israel Summer Internship Program, where a subset of the Hassenfeld Fellow trip participants are able to remain in Tel Aviv and complete a summer-long internship with an Israeli company or startup. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce our distinguished speakers. Okay, Philippe Wells is a seasoned entrepreneur in the health and wellness industry. Previously, he worked in structured finance at Bain Capital and in strategy consulting at the Boston Consulting Group. From 2002 to 2018, Philippe built a national chain of yoga and wellness studios, which he subsequently sold to YogaWorks. His expertise and accomplishments in the field have been recognized in prominent media outlets such as the New York Times, Boston Globe, Boston Business Journal, etc. A strong believer in the healing power of foods, Philippe was a pioneer in cold-pressed juice cleanses and superfood nutrition. He founded and sold several companies in this sector from 2009 to 2012. From 1998 to 2002, Philippe was a member of the founding team that built Bain Capital's structured credit group into a multi-billion dollar business. Not million and not trillion, okay? Since 2019, Philippe has taught and developed courses at Brandeis International Business School in entrepreneurship, social impact investing, business fundamentals, and data analytics for business. Philippe is a dual Swiss-American national and is fluent in English, French, and German. He is an avid swimmer, tennis player, and philanthropist. He received his BA in economics from Yale University and his master's and PhD degrees from Harvard University. Michael Eisenberg, our guest today, visiting us from Israel, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Is a general partner at Aleph. It's an equal partnership and early stage venture capital fund with over 500 million under management. Aleph focuses on partnering with great Israeli entrepreneurs to build large, meaningful companies and impactful global brands. Since its founding in 2013, Aleph has invested in more than 40 companies, including Melio, Lemonade, Bring, JoyTunes, Healthy.io, and Nexar. Prior to Aleph, Michael was a general partner at Benchmark Capital, which he joined in July 2005, and where he continues as the partner responsible for Benchmark's Israeli portfolio. Michael has focused on internet and software-enabled service investments since 1995. He has invested in and served on the boards of some of Israel's leading companies and startups, such as Wix, Conduit, Gigya, acquired by SAP, Picture Vision, acquired by EK, Shopping.com, acquired by eBay, Tradium, acquired by Vert, and Lemonade. Since 2006, Michael has been writing the blog, 6 Kids and a Full-Time Job, on topics ranging from politics to technology, Judaism, and macroeconomics. He is a frequent contributor to The Marker and to Calculist, Israel's Hebrew language daily business newspapers, and is the author of the Humus Manifesto, the seminal piece on Israel's innovation scene. Michael has also published 5 books in Hebrew: The Vanishing Jew, then Baruch, The Tree of Life and Prosperity, and Everyone Can Be Moses and Roaring Tribe. He lectures frequently on venture capital, Israel, and entrepreneurship. In 2020, he established the Nevo Network, a first-of-its-kind fellowship program to elevate immigrants to Israel working in high tech. Michael lives in Jerusalem with his wife and 8 children. Okay, so on that note, you should all have received raffle tickets today as you entered the classroom. At the end of the discussion, we will draw a few of these tickets, and these lucky individuals will be given a signed copy of The Tree of Life and Prosperity. So many thanks to Philippe and Michael for your participation today. We really appreciate that you have come to Brandeis on your trip. We're very thankful you're here. Great. Thank you. I hope everyone enjoys the afternoon.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Katie. That was great. Let's see, are we good with the speaker? Does that sound good? Okay. So the format for today actually is pretty open-ended. I think Michael encourages everyone to ask questions and participate. I have notes. I have slides. I have structure. I can carry the whole thing with just Michael, but I think it would be great to get as many questions from the audience as we can. Now, let me just start with a couple of things so we can get going, get warmed up here. So here's the book, Tree of Life and Prosperity. And it's 21st century business principles from the book of Genesis. So the question is, where do we begin?
Well played.
Let's start with Aleph. So I was poking around your website, and I came across some articles, just posts on the website. This is Investor Relationships, Not Transactions, something you put up, Michael Eisenberg. And there's also a chart, which, 2x2 BCG type chart. We recognize that from consulting or investing. Then, look a little further. Faith, trust, and pixie dust. We have that picture. There's an Easter egg. Boom. So, what is it? How would you describe? I mean, that's kind of, it's fun to see the picture of Disney World. But, looking through Aleph mantra since inception has been different is better than better. I think looking at the website, we see definitely, something different here than you would expect normally on a VC website. So tell us about what's different about the culture of Aleph.
So I have a mission to make. If you already put that up, I hate Disneyland.
That's Disney World.
Yeah, Disney World. It's most people's happiest place on earth. It's my least favorite place on earth. I went there with my children. All I want to do is run out the other door. And the reason for it partially is because it feels fake. Because really, my least favorite place on earth is Las Vegas, because it feels fake. But Erica, who is from Florida and is our head of communications, loves Disney World and thinks there's so much to learn about it. And therein lies a very important quality of Aleph, which is, number one, we believe in diversity of viewpoints, and we let people express the diverse viewpoint. There's not a tone from the top. She knows that I don't like Disney World and that I think it's fake. She said, I just want to let you know I'm going to publish this. And she asked me for my editorial feedback, which I gave her, and some of she accepted, some of she didn't. and then she went ahead and published it. And it's really the kind of environment we try to cultivate, which is, number one, take initiative. So anyone can write at Olive. By the way, any of our entrepreneurs can submit to us and we'll publish it. Or, by the way, employees at our companies. There's an amazing post up there for those interested in what the dean was talking about before, which is analytics. There's a woman named Yael Tiano Cohen, who is like the pioneer of a role called BizOps at technology startups. And she's like the metrics czar. And she published an amazing blog post on her website about this role called BizOps. And so we'll publish anyway, that's the first thing. The second thing is, if different is better than better, you need to enable ideas to bubble from everywhere, because otherwise you get into groupthink. And so we have active forums that encourage anybody to take initiative, and we actually, at times, it's not true anymore because we got rid of bonuses altogether. We used to actually bonus on initiative taken even if it failed. And so we would bonus on that. And we have a stand-up meeting at a venture capital fund, which for those of you who've never been to a venture fund is unheard of. There's a stand-up meeting every Sunday morning for all the employees and everybody to share what they did the previous week, what they're going to do the next week, and something that they need help on or want to initiate. And the last thing I'll say on this topic is our brand, because I write a lot and my partner Aiden wrote a lot, became around valuable content for entrepreneurs and LPs. And that has stood out. And so we've got more busy, but we've doubled down. We view our website as a place, for content. Funny story, we're an equal partnership, as was mentioned before. And our third partner comes in, he becomes an equal partner. And he says, your website stinks. And we said, why? Everyone seems to like it, there's great content there. He said, no one can figure out who's in our portfolio. He said, they can go to Crunchbase, they can go to LinkedIn, well, they gotta look at our website. No venture capital fund in the world doesn't have a profile on the website. And you say, exactly, that's great. He spent 5 years fighting this and finally got his way 6 months ago. He got the whole portfolio up on the website, but I haven't looked at it.
I pulled a couple of things from it. So
All right.
you'll see it today for the first time. Great, okay. So moving on. As I said, I do have structure for the talk, and actually it's based on the chapters in the book. And what I did for each of the 12 chapters is I just pulled something from the book, or actually from Michael's life, I thought was interesting and applicable. So this one actually, something I found online from an interview you did. This was early, so this is before. We're going, really taking this Genesis thing seriously. We're going the beginning to the beginning to the beginning before the beginning. I don't know which beginning this is, but you have this quote out of Desperation. I founded a startup merchant bank focused on tech. I knew nothing about tech, but I knew a bit about the internet. 1995, the beginning of the internet. How do you found a startup merchant bank out of desperation?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I'll tell you the real story. I don't often tell this story just because it sounds so ridiculous, but it's the truth. So I started my career working for a company based on 84 State Street in Boston. They hired me right out of college, and another funny story, to be their guy in Israel because I spoke Hebrew. I didn't know anything about political consulting, which was their work, but they needed someone in Israel who was cheap, and I qualified right out of school. And so I trained, actually. I got married on like June the 13th, 1993. We moved to Israel on August the 11th. I started work, I think it was May the 28th, like the day before graduation from college. And I came up to Boston basically every week. Now, I had a newly married wife back in New York, but whatever. And that's what I did so that we could go to Israel and I would have a job. And I worked in political consulting for a year and a half. And, or kind of. For a year and a half, because at some point they just stopped paying me, just like right before the internet. So at some point, like my salary check, I used to pay for the expenses and they paid me back in arrears, and that stopped coming too. And I found myself in debt and couldn't find them. Actually, I would call them, my calls went unanswered. I realized I was unemployed. And I better go do something about this. In parentheses, I'll tell you, they still actually owe me about $30,000, but it's all good. It's a great lesson in life, seriously. I decided not to stay focused on that and to just try to go forward and see what I could do to dig myself out of the hole. And so I interviewed at company after company after company, and I couldn't get a job. I had no skill. I mentioned upstairs we were having lunch. I wasn't that studious in college. I caused more trouble than I did studying. It's not something I recommend. And so I couldn't find something. And at that time, also in Israel, it was all about where did you serve in the military. Every venture capitalist at the time was either a pilot or a guy who had been in one of these elite army units, and I had been in neither. And I literally couldn't get a job. And so I decided I got to start something, but I didn't know what to start. So one day I was reading the newspaper and saw that a company called Robertson Stevens. Now, only if you're over 40 in this room, we know what Robertson Stevens is. Robertson Stevens is one of what was called the Four Horsemen. These were investment banks in San Francisco. One of them was Baltimore, 3 were in San Francisco, that took tech startups public in the 90s. Okay, there was like Goldman Sachs would never touch a tech startup in the 90s. Morgan Stanley would touch a tech startup in the 90s. And that's why Amazon was brought public by the august firm of Deutsche Morgan Grunfeld, which no one's ever heard of. It lasted for about 6 years, 7 years. But these 4 guys, Hammerman Quist, Alex Brown, Robertson Stevens, and Montgomery Securities, the 4 horsemen, and the newspaper says that Robertson Stevens is going to open in Israel. And so I said, okay, they must have a competitor. I didn't know about the 4 horsemen then. So I called my buddy who was in New York, and I said, do you have a LexisNexis machine? That was before the internet, basically, around the time. This was a machine you could kind of do research on. He worked for an actuarial firm in New Jersey. And he said, yes. I said, I need to find out who is a competitor to Robertson Stevens. Which he did. He came back and said, your sworn enemy is Montgomery Securities. And I said, perfect. And so every day at 7 a.m. San Francisco time, and at noon San Francisco time, which was 10 p.m. in Israel and 5 p.m. in Israel, I would call the CEO of Montgomery Securities. And I know who he was. I had a name. His name was Tom Wise. I called the switchboard the first time. Once upon a time, I was sleeping on the switchboard. And he said, I'd like to be put through to Tom Wise. And they go, who are you? I said, it's Mr. Eisenberg. I was 24, by the way. And they put me through to the secretary. His name was Lucille, by the way. I still remember. Picked up the phone. Yeah, Mr. Wise will call you back. Sure. And for 2 weeks, this went on twice a day. For 2 weeks. And then lucky fortune struck. On the front page of the Jerusalem Post was a picture of Sandy Robertson, Robertson Stevens, landing on a plane in Israel. I photocopied the front page of the newspaper. I put it in a fax machine. People still use those. I called Lucille. I said, what's your fax number? She gave me the fax number. In her fax machine, it said, Dear Tom, Sandy landed in Israel. I put it through. 10 minutes later, phone rings. And it's Tom Weisel. He says, who the F are you? And what the F do you want? And I told him, hey, you cannot be in Israel. Sandy Robertson's here. And he said, when's the next time you're going to be in San Francisco? I'd never been to San Francisco at that point, ever. I said, next week. And I boarded the last row of the TWA plane. Yeah, the next funny part of the story is I landed in San Francisco, and there was a guy waiting with a sign, Mr. Eisenberg. I thought, look, it's my dad. It was like hilarious. And a limo, at a 5-star hotel. And I went, and I turned up in Tom Weisel's office, now Thomas Weisel Partners. And then, and he said, what do we got to do? Sandy can't be there, what we got to do? And he said, go see my head of investment banking, Joe Shell. And I walked out 2 hours later with a contract to represent them in Israel. But I was honest enough with myself to know I had no idea what I was doing, and that this was a fluke, right? And in the era of the internet, this would never happen because they could actually look me up and know what a joker I was. At that point, I was in San Francisco, what are they going to do? So I then came back with this contract, which was like paying me $10,000 a month to represent Montgomery Securities to do IPOs, which I didn't know what they were, and raise capital. And called the guy who would turn me down for a job, named Shlomo Kalish, who was well-connected at a consulting firm. I said to him, hey Shlomo, you don't got a business model, but you're really well-connected to what you're talking about. I got a business model, but I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. So why don't we partner? And that's how we got started with the merchant bank. And then we got saved by the bubble, by the way. This is the best part of the whole thing, which is we started doing this. I knew a little something about the internet because of my time in college in the early 90s. And so there was a guy named, I tell him the book, I backed the first online photo sharing startup. Now today it sounds like everyone does photo sharing thing on my phone, but there weren't smartphones and there weren't even digital cameras yet. And so you had negatives and had to be scanned. So the bubble came, and the first 11 deals we did, 8 went public or got bought because it was the bubble. But made everyone look.
It worked.
It worked. There's a guy, I'll never forget, Dave Butler, who I met like in 1999. He was the head of revenue, I think, a company called Four Systems, which is a big networking provider. He once said, "I love my bubble, let's keep it forever."
Wow, that's a great story. All right, well, I have to put up the next slide because when you told me about the website, it became clear why we need the next slide. So this is second chapter, Frustrated Inventor, Technological Innovation and Moral Innovation. And so there's a great story about Noah in the book. Instead, today, what I thought we could talk about is, first of all, your website, which is really nice, and Lemonade, I think, is an example. So you talked about the photo sharing company, and I think that Lemonade, which recently went public, is, at least to me, seems to be a great example of this technological innovation and moral innovation. So I wonder if you could talk about it through that lens. If you want to throw in Noah, that's great too. But.
So maybe I'll back up and we can bat around some larger ideas. So anyone reading the press today or just walking through the world, I think feels that we're at some sort of inflection point on the economy in one form or another. And there's a generation of people who think socialism ought to come back. I'm definitely not in that camp. I think that's been a failed test. It's failed the A/B test about 20 times already. It's a bad idea. And I think it's pretty obvious, at least to me, that capitalism has been the greatest driver of innovation, improving humanity's plight that perhaps there ever was. And so those are, I think, two kind of anchors. However, I think we also need to recognize that it doesn't work for everybody, and it has its own issues, and it has particular challenges in a low-friction technology economy with network effects, right? And I actually don't buy this whole wealth gap thing more broadly. I think the gap, by making it a wealth gap, the politicians and social scientists have done a real disservice to the real problem. What we really need to talk about is a technology gap and an innovation gap and what I would call an economic model gap. And so, just to put it in one frame, there was a whole story about Elon Musk last week and selling his shares or selling the shares on Twitter or whatever it is. They can tax Elon Musk as much as he wants. It's like 5 hours in the federal budget. It's like a joke, right? That's not the issue. But we do need to talk about the systemic issues, and there are real systemic issues. So my macro view is we're at a different phase of economic life right now, which is around what I'm calling the responsibility economy. In my third book, which is in Hebrew, third book in the series in Hebrew, hasn't made it to English yet. In Hebrew, I call it Kalkalat Achva, which means the brotherhood economy, but better translated into English is the responsibility economy, which is, I think, the next phase of capitalism. And it goes something like this. There are a lot of areas that the government has assumed, which are better in the hands of the civic population. I'll explain why. The economy is accelerating, technology is accelerating, everything is accelerating. I mean, everything is accelerating. The structures of government right now are totally incapable of keeping up with those changes. It's just a fact. They're not capable of keeping up. So therefore, they're actually unable to solve the problem. It's not their fault, by the way. It's just structural. And we have many, you worked at Bain, you look at structural problems all day and all night. And sometimes you need to restructure. And we're at a point where the current model of what belongs to the business and civilian population, what belongs to the government, is wrong. It's out of whack, and it can't solve the problem. And my own answer to it, which is biblical in nature, is that we need to devolve more to local levels, to regional levels, and primarily to civic responsibility. I'll back up 1 second. You'll all note that there's a lot of discussion, talking about it upstairs, that like there's a religious exemption from getting vaccinated, right? Or this exemption. And that conversation in general, I don't want to wear a mask, I don't want to get vaccinated, that's a COVID issue. I don't want to do that, it's a rights conversation,
right? I have rights. Why do I say I have rights? I have rights because I'm afraid that the government is going to take away my rights. So we have a rights conversation, the Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights, etc. What we need to have is responsibilities conversations. What are my duties and what are my responsibilities to civic society? The society will suck if we don't empower more people to have a good economic outcome in a modern technology digital society. That's not a government problem. They can't fix it. That's your problem, and your problem, and your problem, and my problem. Because no one wants to live in a community where 85%, and that's the numbers we didn't talk about, are left behind. And they can't make it work. And redistribution, which is kind of an old notion, doesn't work either because it doesn't solve the core problem, which is a problem of access to technology, of education, of expectation, and of aspiration. There are no models for how we get there. And so, if you're in this room, you're one of the lucky 1% in the world. This is not a 199 government. You're the lucky 10% of the world. So it becomes your civic duty and responsibility to empower people economically. We also know that the zero-sum conversation that many of the politicians are driving, which is we need to redivide the pie, is nonsense. How do we know it's nonsense? We can grow the pie. Just the fact that the Asian tigers, we used to call the Asian tigers, and now it's called Southeast Asia, has emerged out of agrarian poverty to become some of the most technologically advanced societies in the world. The global GDP has grown, proves we can grow the pie. We just don't think that way on a micro level, we think that way on a macro level. So when you start thinking that way on a micro level, this responsibility economy, it becomes a civic responsibility to empower other people to get educated and to aspire for economic independence and economic participation and growth in this economy. Part one. Part two, because of that, because of that, we have a new model to solve social gaps. It's what I call market caps can solve social gaps. Now this is anathema in modern political discourse, in which it's tax the corporations, kill them, they're the root of all evil. The answer is, it's not. The reason we haven't had inflation, massive inflation until now, is because technology is massively deflationary. Amazon is massively deflationary. And for those of you wondering, inflation is a tax on poor people. A giant tax on poor people. Two big taxes on poor people, the lottery, and inflation. And technology is deflationary. We actually ought to thank Jeff Bezos for keeping inflation under control for the last 10 years. We need to use those market caps to empower more people in this responsibility economy. And that's what Lemonade does. Lemonade came and said the following. In the responsibility economy, I can't have an adversarial relationship between an insurance company and customer. That's point one. Right now, if you have Progressive insurance or you have State Farm insurance, and you get into an accident or there's a flood in your house, you got a problem because they make more money by denying your claim. They are uniquely incentivized to make your life miserable. My daughter's had a health claim on something in Israel. They wanted her, literally, to mail in, snail mail, the receipt she got from the doctor for something we've been paying insurance on for 20 years. I happen to know the CEO, he wanted to invest in my fund. I said to him, hey bud, you're not investing in my fund, you can't take care of my daughter. And most people have access to that though. And so, but it's obvious that it'll happen because it's adversarial. They make more money than I your claim. Came Lemonade and said, this is not aligned. This is not a responsibility economy. What is? We're just going to take a flat fee to manage the insurance pool because insurance is basically social good. You make a lot of money doing it. It's social good. And by the way, the other big cost of insurance is fraud. By the way, about 25 to 35% of the policy you pay for insurance is because somebody else in this room decided to be a fraud. No one in this room. Somebody else outside this room decided to defraud the insurance company. And they said, well, we got to solve that. How do we solve that? They did research and showed that insurance is a victimless crime. Nobody thinks they're terrorizing anyone or victimizing anyone. So they said, okay, you pick the charity that the leftover premiums go to. And if you file a fraudulent claim, the only one you're missing over is the charity. How do you feel about that? And so all of a sudden you create an alignment. You're responsible to the charity. You're responsible to the other people who are insured by this company. And we're responsible to you that we're not going to make any more money by denying your claim. We're fully aligned. And through that, we brought more people under this umbrella. And people can afford insurance more now. You know, the cost of renter's insurance on Lemonade is way below what it is on anyone else. And our claims are lower. And so we're, I think, the most profitable rental insurance company in the world. We have other lines now, we have auto and Housing. Long-winded, sorry for the long-winded response.
That's what we're looking for here.
Okay.
It's,
I didn't know.
I had a sense after I read the book, these would be long-winded answers.
Oh, God.
Good, but extensive. Any questions at this point, guys? Okay. So feel free, by the way, to any point, just, oh, there we go, you don't.
Well, thank you so much. So you mentioned the fraud part. So it says here that Lemonade is powered by AI.
Yeah.
Is that basically the part within the AI that the company is using the AI technology to recognize the fraud?
Also pricing,
Okay.
marketing, and a bunch of other things. You know, we have a very, very, very large data set at this point. We put the AI to good use, and you know, also because of this notion that we have around, you know, timeless principles driving, we spend time on AI ethics as well, and areas like that. So it's also, our AI in catching fraud is pretty good. But to be candid, you need the AI on the fraud, but we also, because of alignment, because we have less trumped up fraud, let's call it.
Good.
There's another question.
Yeah, so thank you. It's a really interesting perspective. I was wondering about that idea of a responsibility economy, and you spoke a little bit about how to get corporations to buy into that. But what if corporations kind of don't buy into it?
What's your name?
Rachel?
Rachel, I'm glad you asked that question. So one of the claims I make in this book, and in book 3 also, is that in the 21st century, at some point there'll be a tipping point because you're not going to have a choice. And I think the reason you're not going to have a choice is the following. Everything has become so transparent that customers are going to demand this. And my guess is if we can give it the words it needs, we can make it easier for them to accept this. And so Salesforce.com, which is, I think, an absolute model for responsibility economy, has trounced competition and is able to attract talent because the kind of timeless principles that they're after really work. And Lemonade, the same, they're able to attract talent at scale that's remarkable. Because the other part of this is not just the transparency that will cause customers to demand of the business. 21st century businesses, well, I'll ask you the question. What do you think is the biggest difference between the 20th century business and 21st century business?
Technology?
Technology, okay. So what was the core cause for output in a 20th century business?
The core cause for output?
Yeah, what would cause a business to have an output, to produce something?
Just consumer demand?
No, that's the demand side. What would it enable a company to have, to make an output, to make a product?
I don't know what resources, but physical resources?
Physical resources, like a manufacturing facility, a factory, a piece of equipment, right? And what is it in the 21st century?
Technology.
What's technology?
Well,
Where does it come
social
from?
media.
What's the factory for technology?
The factory for technology? Engagement? Mind?
Your brain is the factory for technology. Now I have an amazing biological discovery for you, ready? Every brain is attached to a body, and every body there's a heart. And so the best way to attract the best minds is not only by talking to their minds, but by talking to their hearts. And this is not some kumbaya something or something like that. It's nonsense. People want to work on really important problems. That's what they want to work on. The best engineering minds want to work on difficult engineering problems and difficult problems for business, humanity, whatever it is. And so the best way to attract the best minds is to work on a really meaningful problem. And if you believe, like I do, that market caps close social gaps, right? And I deeply believe that. Then we can attract the best minds to work on the most nettlesome problems, and therefore the 21st century economy will drive people towards greater responsibility. None of this happens overnight, by the way. We got this, because we'll go up to the microwave generation. I think everything takes 1 minute. No, the process actually takes real time, right? And I joke, we don't have a microwave in our house. And I tell my kids all the time, it's because they shouldn't believe that things happen as quickly as they happen in the microwave. And it takes time. We're like become an impatient generation. Click and click and refresh, and click and click. It'll take time, but I think it's going to happen.
Thank you.
JD.
Hi, I'm a lemonade customer and I really,
Yay!
but also I have a question about the whole market cap thing you're saying, but doesn't having a larger market cap like stifle competition and like innovation because the company is more satisfied to just keep on doing what they're doing because there's no one physically able to compete with them because they just have more resources and more money? Like with now you see the big four tech companies, there isn't really much.
That goes back to, what was her name?
Rachel.
Rachel's distinction. Again, in the 20th century, where the means of production were big factory equipment, so yeah. In the 21st century, where you need more brains, I don't buy it. Look, even if you go back to the end of the last century, Netscape came out of nowhere and built the first browser. All right, Microsoft had to respond. They did respond, they bundled it, the government stopped them from bundling it at that point in time. But Internet Explorer still controlled Internet Explorer is Microsoft's browser, still controlled the vast lion's share of the market, but Google emerged, and Facebook emerged, and Yahoo emerged, and a lot of things emerged that changed the economy. And I just think that technology is so fast changing that our old notions of this market cap problem is, just look here, Amazon, I think it was the first company with $1 trillion market cap, right? Was it? But they're Shopify. And now there's kind of, the rise of the rest around the world. Now Amazon's a big channel, don't misunderstand me, and they engaged in some practices that if the federal statute wasn't what it was today, it'd probably be called monopolist. Which, by the way, that's another good example of how the government just can't keep up. But, I believe that technology will solve this. Would I like to see Facebook forced to make social profiles portable? Yes, I would. Do I think that's a good outcome? Yes, I think it would be a good outcome. Do I think it'll happen anyway? Yes, I think it'll happen anyway, even if the government doesn't intervene. Because when Web3 comes along, who's going to want to give Facebook their money if they take the money for themselves? Right? If I can tokenize my own social profile, why am I going to give it to Facebook? It's ridiculous. And that just keeps happening generation after generation as this thing just kind of blows the previous order apart. And when things are digital and frictionless, I think that'll happen. And by the way, I'm glad Facebook's making a big run at VR. I think they'll take their eye off the ball on the other stuff. And now it's boom.
Perfect, all right. Well, let's see, so my next slide might be more of a kumbaya slide. So this is about, trial and error. It's about the Carnegie problem. It's the proper administration of wealth being the problem. And then I had more of a biblical quote here, the wealthy Abraham, not enough for him to build a home with high hedges and to invest his wealth. He desired and set out to build a society that would work for others.
Yeah.
So how do we think about that in the context of some of these questions? Is it, technology forcing them to think about how to build a society that works for others, or does this come, is this the heart and the brain, or how, it's not kumbaya.
This is so not kumbaya.
So how do we, do we just wait, or,
No, look, I think, if you haven't read Carnegie's booklet or pamphlet on wealth, you should read it. It's really good about reading. He might have been the first guy ever to consider this problem, who had such significant means. None of the landowners in feudal society, I think, ever considered this problem even. And in Carnegie, if you haven't read him, basically says the following: there's more talented, more wealthy people in the world, and they ought to manage fortunes on behalf of those who are poor and incapable. And build for them the things they need. It's very, very paternalistic. And at the same time, I give a lot of credit, in his time. And by the way, in a lot of the discourse today, we've kind of lost the concept of different times and different kinds of people, and things evolve slowly, etc. And so it's important to say that he was really a breakthrough thinker in this way in his time. And we stand on his giant shoulders. But my view of his paternalistic approach is that it's unbiblical, but more than unbiblical, it doesn't work in modern society. And So Carnegie says the following. He really believes that some significant form of the population probably is destined to be poor and incapable. And by the way, the manufacturing economy may have even been right. But in a technology economy, where we can improve people's brains, I think he's wrong. And so the Abrahamic approach is we can grow the pie. We are responsible to help other people. So the kind of canonical Abraham story is he comes from the place he's born, he comes into the land of Canaan, the land of Israel, and he brings a few things with him. He brings his wife, he brings kind of his groupies, and then it says he brings his nephew. And the nephew, his name is Lot. We know one biographical fact about it. Does everyone know what the biographical fact is? He was an orphan. He was an orphan. And so, immediately in the story of Abraham, he's wealthy, he brings his possessions with him, he brings the orphan. The orphan, in ancient times, was the man who had no land, he had no means of production, he had no means to earn an income. This was absolutely raising up, somebody who was unfortunate, who didn't have a way to earn an income. And then they go down, there's a famine, so think about 2008, great financial crisis, they had one 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, and Abraham goes down to Egypt. When they come back from Egypt, the Bible gives a very important thing. It says Abraham is more wealthy, and Lot is independently wealthy. You imagine that Abraham was received in the king's palace because he was some sort of prince, uses whatever he did to enable Lot to become independently wealthy and go his own way and become independent. He got into trouble afterwards, but he was independent. And I think that's a giant difference between the Abrahamic model, and I think it's the responsibility economy model, and the Carnegie model. We can grow the pie by educating people, by enabling people, by partnering with people, by mentoring people and letting them become independently wealthy. We got to get over our own egos, though, because in a lot of this, it's like, yeah, I made him who he was. I made him who he was. I made him who he was, right? That's like a big human. No, we enabled him, thank God. The pie grew, and we're all better off. And we'll all be better off if more people are better off, not if we're paternalistic to them. And I think that's the model. That's the empowerment economy, responsibility economy. But it's civic. The government cannot do this. Government, Obama, and I think a fair amount of foresight, wanted to recreate the technical colleges, right, to teach people trades. I think that was actually a really, really good idea, but the execution's been terrible. And so I don't think that's an accident that the execution's been terrible. But, a buddy of mine wanted to set up an institute for technology and policy at Purdue University. It was up in 1 minute. And he decided to take responsibility for it, and he owns it. And I think that's part of civic responsibility. We don't talk about it enough, and I think we don't demand it of people. I think we can demand things of people, and we should. Not politicians, that comes across as, browbeating. But I think as civic society, we say we have an expectation that we empower the people. Take it on.
Question
Hi.
there.
I work at the business school. My name is Kate, and thank you both for today. My question is, so where do we start? And I know we don't have 6 months here to answer that question, but when you are talking about civic responsibility, what would a quick snapshot of how we begin?
I have a few ideas on that.
Okay, thank you.
I'll split them into 2 buckets. Practically, I think the United States needs to go back to a model of national service, either the draft or national service, the military. Because I think you create civic responsibility, is what I argue in my 3rd book, that we have a backwards conception of how this works. Modern conception of how we work together goes something like this. I like you, we have a joint interest, let's go work together. In fact, it's the opposite. And this is, in my view, been proven by Israel hands down, which is we worked together, we sweated together, we created something together, we failed together, we got back on our feet together, then we can work together. And even if we think differently, we can accommodate each other because we went through joint experiences. And the United States doesn't have enough joint experiences to make this work right now. And you need to create that joint experiences. That creates this notion of mutual responsibility that is absolutely necessary. It also enables people to know the other. Right? How many of you in this room in the south side of Chicago? You have? Wow, God bless you. And you're here to tell the tale. But, you know, very few people, you know, go to these places, and we need to move people around to go do that. So that's kind of practical comment one. Practical comment two is what I would call, I hope no one gets offended by what I'm about to say right now. When kids are in high school in this country, they have no time to do civic responsibility things because they're on the academic hamster wheel. The SATs to get in college, the early admission, you know what I'm talking about, right? All the kids are not in the room, the professors are not sure. But it's an academic hamster wheel, and we develop our formative views of what our responsibility is in life in high school, actually. And by not giving kids time in high school to pursue extracurricular activities, which involve communal responsibility, which involve kind of exploring not just members of the other sex, but you know, things of meaning and value, it's hard. And on this academic hamster wheel, it's really difficult. But the amount of homework given in high schools today, I was trying to say, we don't force your kids to do their homework, so they go out and do other things. I know that sounds really responsible as parents, but I think it's important. So that's kind of on what I would call the quick-ish fix. And by the way, I think if there was a civic movement to start national service, it stands a greater chance in the partisan divide of today of gaining traction than if it comes from the politicians. So it'd be useful if there was a civic movement in this regard. The second part of it is what I'm trying to work on right now, which is we need a language. Right? We have a language for socialism, we have a language for capitalism, we have a language for political economy. We don't have a language yet for what I call this responsibility economy. Market caps create social gaps. I'm literally working on a dictionary right now. And I think the more we can create a language over what civic responsibility means in a modern economy, what customer initiative rather than rage means in a modern economy, what a mutual technology education looks like in a modern economy, we can kind of get there. Again, we're not going to microwave it, but I think we can go this. We need a language. Like one of my great aspirations is I want to set up some sort of institute or fellowship around this language of what this new economy looks like. Because I think it's happening, by the way. You see pockets of it. My job as a venture capitalist is to put a couple of dots together and say it's a trend. You see pockets between Salesforce.com, which I think is a big pocket. Mark Benioff is a useful advocate. At Princeton, there's a couple of people working on stuff like this that I've run into. There's a Catholic professor in North Carolina who, because of my book, I run into. So I wrote the book and things have kind of started to come together. There's a group in D.C. Where the founder is. He reached out. The founder created was bothered by payday loans. But for those of you who don't know, payday loans is a societal evil. It's evil. I know people think it feels a need. It does. But it's usurious and it drives people into this feeling of scarcity on an ongoing basis. We make terrible decisions. And the scarcity mindset is a disaster. And so this guy decided that he, from a place of faith, that he had to get rid of payday loans and use technology to build a startup that would eviscerate payday loans. He didn't get to the end. He did create a very successful startup that in certain regions of the country actually worked. He reached out. So I see kind of nuggets of this starting to emerge, but it doesn't have a coherent language yet. Sorry for the long-winded answer. I apologize for my long-winded answers.
No, it's fine. You guys can stay an extra 2 hours, right?
Oh, God.
No, that's chapter 3. Yeah, we're not going to make it through all the slides. But actually, I think, look, I want to do one more slide. Part because I want to show you. Let's see. So, leadership potential. Let's see. Actually, I was thinking. Sorry. Okay. Let's talk about this one actually. Parts you can see it's on your website. It provides up. Because I think this ties into what you were talking about with payday loans. So it's who charts their course on the basis of their values to surrender. It's not necessary to surrender your business acumen if you chart your course on the basis of your values. And on the contrary, business skills can help promote your values. And I think that Rise Up is an interesting example, perhaps, of sort of values and business skills and personal values. So maybe you just talk a little bit more about Rise Up, and then some big caps that also in the context, a little bit of the civic values and civic responsibility, and do it all in 5 minutes.
We have 10, I think. Oh, we are wrapping up.
As much time as we want.
The founder of Rise Up grew up poor in Petah Tikva, a town in Israel, above the shuk, the marketplace of souk. But he said they never had a feeling of scarcity. And he decided after he sold his first company to Klarna, which is a big famous startup in Europe, that he would build a company that would start focus on the Israeli market. For those of you unfamiliar, there's like 9.5 million, 10 million people in Israel. It's not exactly a big market. But in financial services, you could actually make a lot of money there. But he really wanted to solve a problem. And use Israel as a testing ground to show you could solve a problem. What's the problem I'm trying to solve? What I said before, people in scarcity, financial scarcity, make terrible decisions. There's apparently a Netflix show, which I haven't seen yet. Someone just told me about it on Wednesday, called The Maid. Has anyone seen it? Okay, so apparently there's a
I have a high
scene.
school daughter, so.
There's apparently a scene in The Maid. She's a single mother of a child, apparently, and can't make ends meet. She goes to work, as a maid. And there's a scene in The Maid where she comes to the checkout counter in a supermarket, and she's doing like a mental accounting as to whether she can pay for it on the screen to show you taking it off. And she realizes she has to put back some things, and some guy behind her makes a face at her like, why can't you afford this, or something like that. And that, in his view, I think, as we described already 3 years ago, was what he was after. People who can't make ends meet and are forced into this terrible mental accounting, and then they make bad decisions because of scarcity, and it becomes a downward spiral. Rise Up uses AI. You connect your bank account and your credit card, and they pull all sorts of data from the web, and they give you one number. Like if you got a Fitbit, you got a number of steps. They said, we got to boil down your financial state to one number, which they call cash flow, or how much money you have to spend between now and the end of the month. And the thing's a miracle, literally a miracle. They have moved many, many, many thousands of people out of overdraft and into positive. And we just launched the savings product a week and a half ago. And I forget what percentage, but a significant percentage of our customers set up savings accounts for the first time and automatically move money to their savings account based on the AI at the beginning of the month. So it's out of discretionary spend, it goes in there and it starts to compound. And they did it in a really beautiful gamified way, which so if you save X, Y, and Z, then in 2 years you can afford a vacation to wherever it is, or you can afford the washing machine, or yada, yada, yada. And the thing's on fire right now. It was really hard for 3 years because this is tough. Both getting the product right and the sensitivity right, and telling people that they can do this. And what we discovered is, catch this, the key to this is not just the technology, but the community. So people are posting their snapshots of where they are in their bank account and their spending in a open Facebook group to the members of the Rise Up community. So in front of 10, 15,000 people, they're going to go, I messed up this month, I need tips. Can someone analyze this with me? So now there's community support of peers who say, oh, you can do it, or you got this wrong, or you can get this right, or I got my data help say that. So the community is building on itself and growing faster. It's compounding right now. And it's just a stunning display of this empowerment responsibility, kind of the civic responsibility. The engagement is crazy in this thing. And people are taking it viral on social media, not us. And that's now gotten the mainstream media interested, and it's fascinating. It's a stunning story. And now, by the way, you got demand.
Now, are their customers primarily payday loan people prior to that?
You don't have so much of a payday loan phenomenon in Israel.
Okay.
No, we started with, they did it really smart. They started with single moms who were what they called essential professionals. So they were nurses or teachers or policewomen or whatever it was. And then we went to teachers with the notion that teachers know how to speak also, and they would teach. And now it's gone more broad, but the anchor of the community is what I would call low to middle income salaried professionals who have a hard time making ends meet. But by the way, in many cases, they just don't understand the math of kind of home ec.
Because what I was thinking is that the payday loan interest rate is unbelievable.
Unbelievable. So here's the other thing that went on, which is we've attacked this loan phenomenon. We don't pay payday loans, Israel, but they sell you, because there's no limitations on how you can market credit, they sell you, get your vacation, take an 11% interest rate thing. It says 2%, and then you read below, it's 11%. So it's not payday loans, but we have this notion, and we've attacked them, which caused them to cut us off from the systems. But, you know, we then also help people. One of the things that the AI does is it finds replacement loans. So if you've got a loan in your bank account, we'll find a cheaper rate loan and bring it in to kind of cut your monthly payments, et cetera.
Great idea, great product. That's all our time for today.
Oh my God.
But
It flew.
we know, yeah. How many more of these are coming out? You guys are already a couple books ahead of us in Israel with the Hebrew, but
Hebrew.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
yes.
This idea of responsible economy is excellent, but you talk about the United States and the way we should go back to maybe a draft, so that's more civic responsibility. I have 3 grandchildren that are in high school, one in a private, one in public, and community service is very important in their curriculum. One boy is applying to college right now, and it's not just the academic, as you talk, just academics. They're looking for around kids that really have done other things to contribute to our country and to the world. I'm interested, I know in Israel, you have to go into the military when you're 18 years old. What did the high school kids in Israel do that a community service directed?
Yeah. Excuse me, I'll make a comment. I don't want anyone to misinterpret this, but in the U.S. colleges, I just have a family member who went through this. They're actually looking at how different was that kind of community service, which means, you know, if you're going to Africa, it's better almost.
No.
No? All
It's
right.
changing right now because the colleges are very savvy. We had a big scandal here in the United States, the way people paid for their children
Yeah.
to get into certain schools. I think, if anything, it's gone to some extremes where, and I'm just saying this not in any racist way, but a white kid, a white Jewish kid who is doing well in school, who's community directed, really is going to be discriminated against in somebody from a poor neighborhood who didn't have some of those opportunities. But putting that aside, I'm interested in what the Israeli
Yeah.
kids do, because I know they have to go into the service.
Yes,
But
in high
how
school.
do you differentiate them from our American children?
So, in Israel, because there's no one around in college ages at all, because everyone's in the military, they were gone for 3 to 5 years, the high school kids are the youth directors. And so you've got youth movements in just about every community of every stripe. And, you know, my 11th grader is responsible for 50 kids who are in the 8th and the 9th grade right now. And so that's one thing you've got is the youth movements. The other thing is you've got a series of volunteer organizations. Like I chair another organization called the New Guardians of Shomer Hadash, which does farm work and does kind of security patrol, unarmed security patrol, just being present to prevent agricultural vandalism, which is a big problem in Israel. And we have, it's the largest volunteer organization, there's over 100,000 volunteers. We have a few thousand kids we call the friars. Friars in Israel means a sucker. These are all high school kids who do, I forget what the number is, but it's tens of days a year of this service and turn up, and they also recruit hundreds of other kids. That's kind of their job. And so you've got stuff like this. My older son in high school did what hundreds of other kids in Jerusalem do, worked in a facility for mentally and physically handicapped kids. And so there's kind of a huge range of stuff, and we let them out of school for it.
And you know, the other thing you get when you have a draft or something like that is that all your kids get exposed to the rest of the country.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm old enough to have had to go. And I remember being in the Marine Corps, and the guy next to me was a black from the ghetto of Philadelphia, and the guy next to him was a redneck Alabama farmer. Now, in real life, those two guys had never seen each other. And we had to run this platoon of Marines in Parris Island. And, you know, I've told my kids, they missed out. Because, quite frankly, they really don't know. Biggest problem we faced, rattlesnake in the barracks. What the hell do you do? I'm from Minnesota. I've never seen a rattlesnake. Okay? Well, what do? We called Cochise. He happened to be a Navajo.
Right.
And Cochise walked in, damnedest thing I ever saw. Said, "What's wrong?" "Well, there's a rattlesnake under that bunk." "Oh." He goes and rattles the bunk, and the rattlesnake comes out. He walks behind it, reaches down, thought he was picking up a piece of paper off the floor. Grabs this thing behind the head, it's wrapping itself. "What do you want me to do with it?" "We haven't even thought that far." But this is the exposure to skills.
100%.
And I think, quite frankly, all you guys lost. Because you went to some upscale school, probably in some upscale community, and you've never met people like this. And quite frankly, you lost. And I think what our society is showing is that now we've had 30 or 40 years of this quote-unquote volunteer army, which means it's 40% black.
More so, right?
You know, I don't know what the percentage is, and I used to say, all these people that are threatening blacks, forget, a hell of a lot of those are snipers.
Yeah.
If it comes down to a war, they're gonna die.
Chuck, thank you very much for the support. Appreciate it. Michael, once again, thanks so much for coming back. Here's some memento, big bag of goodies. And hopefully we'll see you back again when the next book comes out in the English version. So thank you. Thank you so much. If you have any one-on-one, I know Michael has to leave in about 5 minutes. People are probably waiting, but if there's a one-on-one question you guys have, maybe one on.
Same here, same here.
If you have one of the raffle ticket numbers up on the board, come get your book.
Good to see you. You too, thank you, take care.
Thank you for having me. Lunch was very well. Thank you so much. Thank you.
One of our winners? Thank you very much.
Are you really?
Love to hear that.
I know. Thank you both. Bless you.
Well, color.
So we're just gonna like solve that.
Yeah, there's a sharp original we're doing right now. What? Suits, right. Yeah. Yeah. So
How did it go?
It's not a fun, that's a, yeah, okay.
It's interesting, I think from a venture perspective, it's still.
That's what we're trying to figure out.
I think that we, yes, but not a venture capital fund. I wouldn't say like Heller, I would say it's a venture capital.
I'm actually happy to talk with Andrew.
Right, that separates the company, yeah.
Thank you for inviting me.
It is, I think we should.
I would absolutely, I don't think I want to.
Nope, not a conversation.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I give those to the people. Thanks for coming. Did everybody pick the book? Yes, they did. They got them all?
Yeah, okay, interesting, in some sense, yeah, okay. Yeah.
My view of you guys is almost pretty engineering as a category, which is, I think you can't have three bottom lines. That's kind of what it is really hard to do. At least until the actual accounting laws. If they get the actual accounting laws, they'll get the but it's also has to pay.
But should we think about, so listen to it.
What goes is
So just
ESG
went
right
through,
in my view, is mostly
this
governance.
academic, anyway, it was just approved by this academic committee. And so look at this.
ESG generically is going to be very inflationary.
Yeah, I will, because that is part of our managed
ESG versus.
You're right,
Look at that. Instead of a 5-year program, we start, or both,
So
whatever.
this is version,
Yeah.
it's sort of like 5.
Yeah.
But again, my view is this market caps go social gaps, and it requires the intentionality of the business to make a lot of.
Yeah, sounds reasonable, sounds reasonable.
That works
I think that
over
there's
the
a
long term.
lot of
I think until then, we'll kind of flirt around with this
So it's
ESG.
a
I think it's gonna
specific,
be,
the OGS is.
it's actually gonna be a problem. It's not going to return the returns people want, people will clamor on the pension funds. But I think we're in kind of one of these cycles where we had this in the late 90s.
It doesn't need to be alumni, actually. I think that's,
No, but that's a fun.
we can figure out how to make it more attractive.
Most of the time, I think that is,
But it was conceived
kind of
context of
in clean tech, it was called something, it had a name. They had a special fund dedicated to, it was the environment, had a better
Your
name.
way of doing it, yeah.
It went really sideways. I think governments also can't generate this out right now.
So it provides a way to also engage.
Sure.
Even some.
Oh, no, I just, actually, I think no, I just wanted to thank you.
Engage non-financial
I can imagine a lot.
with a return.
I know you're correct. No, that's fine, yeah, I'll let you run. Thank you.
Debbie's just getting your stuff, she's gonna bring it down, so don't worry about it, we'll scoot it out of here.
Thanks for getting.
Oh, it's not here.
Thank you, principals. I want to.
So part of the new science too, Facebook is going to be, is going to have election day. Okay.
Got you for a while.
Yeah, but I wanted to.
Have you ever had some internship?
Oh, yeah, you're right. I was just.
I didn't remember which one it was, but I know there was a choice between one or the other.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
That's wow.
Yeah, sure. Good to see you. How's everything going? Thanks for having lunch.
Okay, thank you, Debbie.
And I'm gonna reach out to you about a couple of different things.
Yeah, with pleasure.
Fintech and something, India, Israel stuff.
Oh, that's one of my favorite topics.
I would love to engage you.
I would love that.
You know, I was reading the Minister of Defense of India back in the day. So like during the thing, I was like texting my grandmother. I'm like, hey, you know, Blank was like, oh my God, that used to be one of my clients.
That's a big topic. Huge topic.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this kind of episode.
Great to meet you too.
I love you. I'm in the meeting. Oh yeah.
I love that.
So far.
I think she is, yeah.
So very really happy. Like I love
Small
reading about
steps here, but I would love to.
It's fast time. It's just
All right, we'll get it.
in a way, it's what America's becoming.
It's really cool that,
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
the opportunity. I actually tried to pick small things for travel in there, so you can pull it apart.
So you can sending a.
So,
Actually,
not what a semester, I was in fun, and then I was. That's a travel.
My God.
But there's
That's why I'm late to last. I had questions this morning.
My name's Evan.
Exactly right.
What's your name?
I will tell you that if you need anything, let me know when we come and I'll bring it, but you say you're here.
I'm in consulting. It is.
Thank you.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun.
It's so going to travel.
It's really awesome getting to work with startups. It's fantastic. To me, as a whole, I have some thoughts about it. I'm sure as a senior, you probably know what I'm saying. It's over the past few years, I think COVID hit it very hard. I don't think it's fully ever recovered.
I actually don't know like how many people are into this semester.
Not that many.
Really? Yeah, because I was actually signed up for the program this semester and they only have like 2 of the consulting.
Yeah, we only had 2 choices.
Yeah, so that's why I was like, those really don't really fit in my category. I am like more into environmental like healthcare consulting.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, right, I would go. So I didn't go this semester.
No, neither. And they were fairly similar choices. Like it's,
Yeah.
it was both AI and how people for stuff for like.
I know,
But it was like slightly different. One is definitely one of our choices was
Because this one is actually called Lumberg Academic Center.
marketplaces. It was all about retailing and such. We had a retail products. The other one was for
No
There's
way.
kind of the way, this is what I'm working on, I always like describing it as.
We don't put it in.
We'll test it out.
Notes stuff for whatever you want to read. If you don't
My,
talk
my GPS
No, but
stops
I was also working on like
Whenever
an
we do
AI
it, it goes-
startup when I was doing one of the projects like 1 year ago, 2 years ago maybe.
Okay, great.
Time flies, but
Yeah.
Carol would like one, we have one for Carol.
Okay, that would be great. I'm sure she'd like it. I think it'd be good.
No, it's,
We were thinking that we
that's
were
my problem,
going
like,
to send
we literally
copies
set up
and
person-to-person
then move
event
in
on
and
Friday, and
Ruby
I've been in the
and
club for a year.
Alan.
Like, it's a
and
group event.
Someone we had the
Like,
speaker.
we should have
first in person.
first in-person thing I've ever got to.
Interested, so.
Let's, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh, wait, come back.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Are there any more books?
Do we have one? Yeah, I'll get you one.
Oh, that's what it is, right on the table, or is that for?
No, that's
That's
for
for
you.
you.
Oh, okay. Let me. I think I have enough.
All of it.
See you, Seth.
Yeah, thanks for coming out on a Sunday. That's a huge ask, so thank you. I realize what an ask it is. It, yeah, kind of got away from us here. So,
Yeah. That makes, yeah. That makes, yeah. That probably makes sense if you're doing healthcare policy and stuff, so. Yeah, so it's probably very related. It's a great, good class.
Is there anything here?
I was just gonna say, Philippe was there.
Hats, mics and things. Do you want me to just hold those in my office? Where are they? Yeah.
Because I put them back in the box that he brought them in.
I'll take them in mine.
Okay.
Guess what? I did something stupid.
What?
I had extra flyers and I put them in the recycle bin, but if we're gonna mail them to Beauty and the others, we should include a flyer. Don't you think?
Oh, there's tons around the building still, like there's still ones like hung up in places, so I can grab a handful more.
This is all Philippe's.
Yep, and this is his too. Do we need to turn this whole system off?
Here, we put all of this stuff together.